Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pitts. Ukraine War News Update, third part thereof for the 16th of January 2025. We're going to talk military aid, and we're going to start with Keir Starmer being over in Kyiv at the moment. Now, I didn't emphasise this enough, and I just need to make sure, I know it's a bit of geopolitics at the beginning of this military aid video, but the timing of Keir Starmer's visit to Ukraine is not coincidental. At least that's what many analysts are saying. He has chosen to go at this time just before the inauguration and Trump taking control in the US. I think this is, and I agree with other analysts, that this is I was listening to LBC News in the UK, the radio station today, where they had a long section on this, talking about how this is sending a signal to Ukraine, but also to the US possibly, and to the world to say, look, the UK is standing with Ukraine, and we have signed a 100-year deal agreement with Ukraine, which is to say we're not abandoning you, whatever happens with the US. And it sends a signal to Trump to say, oh, okay, right, which side of the coin should we be, betting on here? Should we try and support Ukraine more? And in fact, we're starting to hear some interesting stuff coming out from the United States, such as sanctions. So they're planning on trying the sanctions route, which is exactly what I wanted. The thing I was most worried about is Trump would come in and lift the sanctions, because literally that's what he had previously said at the Economic Club of New York, I think it was. But I don't think he knew enough about the war in Ukraine, which is one of my big criticisms, is that shut up if you don't know what you're talking about until you do know what you're talking about, and then say stuff. Because otherwise he says things and then he does something completely different, and then people say, oh, you shouldn't have taken him literally. Well, actually, no, he should have shut up and then learnt more and then said his piece. And now we're starting to hear there's some bad things, like Mike Turner being dropped because of pressure apparently from MAGA representatives in Congress. But Mike Turner, the Intelligence Committee chair of that, the Republican, has been dropped. Unfortunately, that's bad news. Good news is that the Americans might be trying to continue actually this journey of increasing sanctions on Russia. We've seen them really ramp up recently. Biden administration too late, well, not too late, but late to do that. They should have been much stronger, much earlier. But I think this is going to really bite. And I think the Trump administration probably realizes there's a lot of leverage there. So anyway, Keir Starmer is in Kyiv now. I don't know if he still is, but he was there today. And that was a very cleverly timed visit. Now, this is the 7th time they've met. So it's not like Keir Starmer has not been supportive of Ukraine and Zelensky. Some people have criticised Keir Starmer for waiting 6 months to go there, but actually Zelensky had been in the UK a whole bunch of times. So they've met abroad as well. So this is the 7th time in 6 months that Keir Starmer has met Zelensky. If that's not a lot, that's more than once a month Keir Starmer is meeting Zelensky. So that's really good. Like, I'm being quite pro-UK here, because I think this is a really good set of signals that we're hearing today. So what was also interesting, almost did a breaking news update if I wasn't so busy with a billion things on at the moment, that Russia knew Keir Starmer was there and then attacked Kyiv today with drones, possibly missiles. There was a lot of sort of gunfire and anti-air air defenses going off. This looks rather like Russia saying we're at war with the UK. They have targeted Kyiv knowing that the UK's Prime Minister was going to be there. I think that's highly controversial. I'd like to see the international community, I'd like to see the UK answer that. I expect they'll just kind of go, oh, yeah, nothing to see here. But actually, that's, again, a form of like waging war. We need to, I think, explicitly recognise this. Anyway, Keir Starmer visited Kyiv for the first time since taking office. Ukraine and UK will sign an agreement deepening cooperation in fields of defence and the economy. And Starmer is expected to announce the allocation of £40 million for economic recovery. What else? Russia launched a drone attack on the centre of Kyiv right during the Prime Minister's visit. This is what Ukrainians see every day. Let's just dip into this.
З ваших сьогоднішніх перемовин російський дрон атакував центр Києва. Як ви сприймаєте такий привіт від російської сторони?
Тому що стосується
So this is actually not the sound of the drone. There are some videos of that. How do you feel about, drones striking the center of Kyiv today? And then, sorry, he then answers.
Дроном сьогодні.
It's translations. So this is, annoyingly, Keir Starmer says, look, this is a reminder for all of us. I won't do my Keir Starmer impression. This is a sign for all of us of what Ukrainians see every day. And it realizes this is makes me realize that this is a daily threat, or you can realize this is a daily threat. And for me, this drone strike, says Starmer, is a real reminder what Ukraine sees every day, and a reminder that this war was brought about by Russian aggression. This is not just an illegal war, but we need to have a lasting peace for Ukraine. A translation there is a little bit dodgy, but you get the point. Right. Zelensky said on the drone attack, we will send a greeting in return. And Starmer emphasized the need for continued support for Ukraine. But there was certainly a lot of conversation about this drone attack. In fact, this was reported by, is it Cowlan? Anyway, here he is, Callum Robertson.
Sky. Look at that. There are massive explosions happening in the capital of Ukraine right now. Massive explosions. While the British Prime Minister is just yards away. And this is proof that Russia is not just at war with Ukraine, they are at war with the entirety of Europe. They are happy to put, and they know Keir Starmer is here, missiles into the capital while he is here, because they are at war with Britain just as much as Ukraine. This country has offered to basically fight this war for us for less than 1% of our GDP, and anyone that's complaining about that needs to shut the fuck up today. I have not heard explosions like this over the skies of Kyiv in a long time. This is a direct attack on the standing British Prime Minister right now.
Apologies for the fruity language, but you get the point. I think that is really well said. Now, Noel Report says gunfire erupted in Kyiv as UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer met with Zelensky during the first official trip to Ukraine. Ukrainian air defense fired at a drone, possibly a Russian decoy, near the Mariinsky Palace. Loud booms echoed through the area. Anyway, Ukraine and the UK signed a landmark 100-year partnership agreement to deepen security ties. Let's listen to Starmer.
Already committed £3 billion for military aid this year, and we're going further to support the front line, providing a £2.2 billion loan, which will be paid back not by Ukraine, but from the interest on frozen Russian assets. And we will keep going further to train Ukrainian troops. In addition to the 50,000 we've already trained in the United Kingdom, we will work with allies to ramp up this work. Let me say very plainly, when it comes to training Ukraine's defenders, nothing is off the table. We have already...
So, okay, sorry about the audio being pretty poor there, but we already know that there's going to be lots of funding underwritten by the frozen Russian assets profits, and he's announcing that, so I don't think that's particularly new. But £2.2 billion of that funding. I think it's interesting that he says, when it comes to training Ukraine's defenders, nothing is off the table. I don't quite know what he means with regards to that. Why is he saying that? What's he hinting at? What's a cryptic message going on there? Nothing's off the table when it comes to training Ukrainian defenders. Is that anything to do with, I don't know, air defense? Is that I don't know. But interesting that you said that. And then there's this 100-year partnership that's both cultural and strategic, military and political and economic. So UK pledging that $3.6 billion, 2.2 million pounds in military support for Ukraine to deliver also artillery barrels. Now, I've heard both artillery barrels and artillery pieces, and I get a feeling it's going to be pieces because they're talking about getting them there soon in a way that you would say if they were, whole bits of artillery and mobile air defense. The UK will also provide new military aid for Ukraine, including 150 barrels, a mobile air defense system, and an expanded training initiative with allied nations. No Reports then says the UK steps up for Ukraine in 2025. Keir Starmer announces 150 UK-made artillery pieces arriving in weeks. So that's going to be very soon. Would you say those barrels will arrive in weeks? Are they as exciting, barrels as opposed to whole pieces? So I don't know. Either pieces or barrels. A new air defense system co-financed with Denmark, and continued training of Ukrainian troops building on the 50,000 already trained. What else can we get from this? So someone else has listed, no reports actually, not someone else. Expanded training on long-range weapons, maritime security in the Baltic and Black and Azov seas, tech in the health, agri-tech and space and drone domains, and UK being a key energy partner. What else? We hear also the Grave Hawk, which is an air defense missile system specially created by the UK for Ukraine. If you remember, this is what's a Super Cat is the chassis here, the vehicle, and then they whacked on. It's a bit of a Frankenstein, but as far as I can work out, they whacked on some air defense missiles, and they created this quite early on, sort of, for Ukraine. 2 systems have already been transferred. 15 more are going to be delivered this year. That's according to Defense Express. And then Keir Starmer and Emmanuel Macron have been discussing sending UK and French peacekeepers to Ukraine after a potential war-ending deal, as according to the Telegraph. Macron supports the idea. The UK sources say Starmer is more cautious due to risks and concerns of escalation. But then in Kyiv, Starmer didn't commit to post-war security force, saying, quote, "We will work with you and all of our allies on steps that would be robust enough to guarantee Ukraine's security, peace and deter future aggression." So there's obviously something going on there. That's Christopher Miller reporting for the Financial Times. There's something going on because he's recognizing security guarantees there. So whatever it looks like, if they aren't going to be able to join NATO, and we hear that basically the US, Germany, but also Hungary and Slovakia, those are 4 NATO nations that don't want Ukraine to join NATO. That's really frustrating that the US and Germany would side with. I mean, we know why Slovakia and Hungary would be like that. It's really frustrating that US and Germany are also similarly reluctant to see Ukraine join NATO. Keir Starmer hinted that UK forces could deploy to Ukraine to train its troops. So maybe that's nothing off the table. When it comes to training Ukraine's defenders, nothing's off the table. So we might see trainers in Ukraine. That makes sense. I wasn't thinking in terms of how they train them. I was thinking in terms of what they would be training them on. That's interesting. Okay. Ukraine extends also, so moving off from the UK now, extends cooperation with Norwegian NASAMS systems supplier. So Ukraine and Norway discussed the possibility of integrating Ukrainian-made air defense systems into the NASAMS systems to increase its effectiveness, says Rustem Umerov, the defense minister. I'm not sure what that means, integrating, because NASAMS is a brilliant system, right? It's been really successful. It's a Norwegian-American co-production. Ukraine and Kongsberg plan to integrate domestic air defense systems into the NASAM system. Yeah, again, not quite sure what that would mean. But anyway, there is this increased sense of Ukraine making things under license and working more closely with foreign industrial concerns. Italian Defense Minister Crosetto has visited Kyiv as well today. This follows recent Italy-Ukraine talks on using frozen Russian assets to boost Ukraine's air defense and ammo supplies. Okay, so that's the big stuff there. We're going to go back. There's a couple of articles I want to dip into. One of it, we're going to look into some depth because I think it's well worth it. Kyiv Independent, as I reported over the last couple of days, is saying here that Zelensky has stated Ukraine's military now totals 880,000 soldiers facing the 600,000 Russian troops. But of course, as I said this morning, it's a little bit dodgy to compare those because that will be the entire kind of MOD and all of the bureaucracy involved in that in Ukraine. But when you're comparing that to the Russian forces in Ukraine, there'll be much more combat forces and logistics and mechanics and whatnot. But I think comparing the two as a like for like is problematic there. President Zelensky had said that yesterday. He does say that the 600,000 are concentrated in specific areas where the 880,000 soldiers for Ukraine are tasked with defending the entire country. So you're going to have border guards, all the borders around Ukraine, whereas that's not quite the case for the Russians, they'll have their own border guards within Russia. So actually, if you're comparing 880,000, you should probably be comparing that with the entirety of the Russian MOD. Ukraine is rapidly expanding its arsenal to strike back at Russia, but domestic production of traditional ballistic and cruise missiles faces delays. Can a war-battered Ukraine defense industry build a new generation of long-distance strike missiles? This is the article I want to dip into, because I've been talking about this for ages, which is a scaling up of distance munitions, drones, missiles, rockets, but particularly cruise and ballistic missiles. What's been going on there? Why is it taking so long? And actually, is it so long when you compare to other nations that take maybe 6-8 years to create these missiles? And Ukraine is trying to get them up within kind of a couple of years. So why Ukraine's long delayed missile production ambitions have yet to get off the ground? Ukraine is rapidly expanding its arsenal to strike back, but there are these delays. Okay. Traditional missiles are tricky. Ukraine's notable successes in scaling up drone production were to a large degree a workaround of the country's limits in defense industry autonomy. Russia and the West gutted Ukraine's weapons factories after the fall of the USSR with the help of local corruption. Those that remain are subject to constant Russian bombardment. As a result, analysts call Zelensky's figures and acclaimed features of traditional missiles made at home an oversell. If Ukraine can only deliver half of what Zelensky promised at the end of 2024 in terms of missile and drone production, I'll be very content. But that's going to be challenging, says Fabian Hoffman, a missile expert and a research fellow at the Oslo Nuclear Project. Ukraine's budding missile program joins a long tradition of metaphorical and literal saber rattling between hostile armies. For the time being, the missiles are yet to prove themselves on a battlefield. The challenge for outside observers is in sorting out ballistics from bluster. Although we have seen, I think, Neptune R360 missiles used, and they have been used with slightly increased frequency, but they keep it a bit quiet. Whenever fully sure, you hear rumours that, oh yeah, that strike was a Neptune. Yeah, anyway, we're going to look into that now. Here's what we know and can assess of the roster of Ukraine's homegrown missiles today. Right, the Neptune, a nautical cruise missile. Originally designed to hit ships from coastal positions, the Neptune has been converted into a cruise missile that can be launched from land, per Ukrainian authorities. If it is what Hoffman calls by far the most mature of these large missile projects. Ukrainian officials said it was a Neptune that struck and sank the Russian cruiser, the Moskva, that flagship back in April 2022. That was used in its primary role, right? An unnamed official told Warzone that they had reconfigured the Neptune to strike and disable an S-400 Russian air defense battery back in August 2023. Various Ukrainian Telegram channels cited anonymous sources saying that the Neptune was used to hit Russian ammunition depot in Rostov on January the 11th, and that was one of the more recent claims about Neptune. But evidence of Neptune's flying is largely limited to government statements or citations of unnamed officials. That is, despite Zelensky touting that the Neptune had been accepted into weaponry in a speech to Ukraine's parliament all the way back in 2020. There were discussions, says Hoffman, that Ukraine would set up production for at least the anti-ship cruise missiles. Initially, we heard that they were very artisanally producing them, just a couple per month at most, but there was not really a production line. But there was this assumption that Ukraine would be able to streamline that to some extent, and that obviously hasn't happened, at least if we derive it from the rate of usage, which really hasn't seen any kind of uptick since 2023. The Thunder 2 or Hrim 2 ballistic variants. So distinct from the cruise missile Neptune, so that's a missile that is usually going slower, and you can change its movement and flies often much lower and then hits its target. Ballistic missile often has that parabolic trajectory and can go into the atmosphere and then come back down very, very fast, and that's what makes it very difficult to shoot down. So anyway, the Hrim 2 or Thunder 2 in English is a ballistic rocket program based on solid fuel and inertial guidance, and in theory reaching speeds several times the speed of sound. Unlike a cruise missile, a ballistic missile goes far into the atmosphere, with many travelling at speeds many times that of sound. The program goes back as far as 2006 under the name Sapsan. So the Sapsan is being used a lot. Interesting, because I'd actually thought they were different missiles, and I was wondering what the Sapsan was. Now it makes sense that actually that's a Hrim 2, the Thunder 2, which at some point became the internal name. as opposed to the envisioned international export model, the HRIM-2. Ukrainian officials said the HRIM-2 has finally passed testing toward the end of 2024, with Zelensky announcing positive results in August. The head of the permanent Ukrainian delegation to NATO said of the HRIM-2 in October, quote, "Here, believe me, there will soon be concrete results that not only Ukraine but the Russian Federation will see. I'm seeing test launch claims from last year, but says Michael Duetzman, a missile specialist at the Middlebury Institute in California, doubtfully about HRIM-2. So again, bombastic claims maybe that don't match reality, but who knows. Korshun and the Vulture lost en route to market. So two projects, the Korshun and Vulture, respectively a cruise missile and a multiple launch rocket system, were the subject of extensive press speculation in the mid to late 2010s. The Korshun was a cruise missile, a scale model of what was getting dragged around weapons conferences a decade ago. Despite being a cruise missile, one pro-Russian Telegram channel in 2017 named it as a basis for the HRIM-2. The Korshun project has effectively been shelved since Zelensky's election. The Vulture is an updated Soviet rocket complex that promised to use modernized Ukrainian-made rockets with higher precision than its predecessor. Despite appearing in Ukrainian military parades as far back as 2018, there's been no evidence of a functional system playing a role since a full-scale invasion. In the same speech in which he promised concrete results for the HRIM-2, Cherniev noted certain components of the Vulture that unfortunately we won't be able to get quickly without specifying what these components were. Various other projects like the volunteer-based Trembita are described as cruise missiles, including in reports from The Economist and The Telegraph, but of nowhere near the speed, range or payload to merit the title, as it is generally understood maxing out at 400 kilometers an hour, 200 kilometers and 20 kilograms in each field respectively. In other words, we've heard a lot about the Trembita. I think more often it's called a kind of missile drone or drone missile. If you throw a rock fast enough, you can call it a missile, says James Acuna, a former naval architect and CIA officer in Eastern Europe, currently consulting on drone production from Estonia, about the Trembita. So why is a missile program so hard? The main distinction between making classic cruise or ballistic missiles and, for example, Ukraine's missile drones, as I just meant, like the Trembita, which the Trembita more closely resembles, is that the lighter and slower missile drones can be made in smaller facilities with a far larger proportion of off-the-shelf commercial components. And that might include the Peklo, the Hell drone missile. The production of these more advanced engines, guidance systems and fuel for more traditional missiles requires bigger permanent facilities and massively more precise engineering. Quote, "This is another level of science and engineering and physics," says Acuna. "Ukraine does not currently have the military-industrial complex to make missiles. Can they make a good Frankenstein missile? Sure, they can do that, but it's not going to take down a Kh-31. Designed during the USSR, the Kh-31 is an air-launched missile which hits Mach 3.5 and still sees regular use in the Russian military. Duetzman, for one, doesn't think the problem is Ukrainian technological savvy so much as Russian air attacks. Quote, "Once you get the basic industry down, it's not that hard. It just becomes immensely harder when someone is trying to bomb all of your factories. Unlike the small workshops in which Ukrainians can produce drones, the factories involved in missile production are massive and their locations well known. Many Russians still alive once worked in them during the Soviet Union. For the duration of the war, Russian airstrikes have targeted them avidly." So when we hear of like Lviv and I don't know, these different places being targeted, Khmelnytsky, Poltava, wherever it may be, it probably is that many of those are factories of the military-industrial complex that have now been hit repeatedly, and it means that the Ukrainians are just unable to build the missiles in these facilities that they would really like to do. So that means they are forced to have these smaller facilities and almost, as was mentioned, artisanally made, things made by volunteers and whatnot on a much smaller scale. These Trembitas and whatnot, they end up being weapons that the Ukrainians might rely more on. In the first months of the war, Russia blew up a massive stockpile of solid rocket fuel in a chemical plant in Pavlograd on the western edge of the Donbass. Following December the 20th attack on Kyiv, the Russian Ministry of Defense said it had hit the construction bureau Luch, which has accomplished planning and production of rocket complex Neptune and a land-based guided rocket complex Vulture. So that could be why we've had delays there. And on January the 8th, Russia bombarded the Ukrainian city of Zaporizhia with glide bombs, resulting in the death of some 13 people and 113 more injured. Among the targeted areas, photos from the National Police showed damage to the Motozikh factory that has long produced jet engines, including the MS-400 turbofan engines that at least some point powered the Neptune. Given such security threats, it's not surprising that Ukraine has been secretive in details about its missile program. When reached, a representative for the Strategic Industries Ministry declined to comment, calling it a sensitive subject. Still, little has been seen of these missiles in action, casting great doubt on Ukraine's actual production. Mass use within Russia would almost certainly have ended up on social media via Russians under bombardment. Despite the secrecy, Ukraine is obviously eager to tout successes in these missile programs. So then the question is, why flaunt it? And then it's about bragging, it's about PR, etc., etc. But anyway, we'll leave the article there. I'm still waiting to see these missiles that have been mentioned there and a few others to be used in the wide scale manner that I would like. We have seen drones being used an awful lot over the last week or so with these consistent attacks into Russia, and possibly a number of these Trembita or similar jet-powered missile drones. I don't know exactly what has been used, potentially some Neptunes as well, but the Ukrainians really need to ramp up the production of those missiles, and it's a shame that the Allied nations have really only kept their missile assistance to Storm Shadows and Scalp-PGs and obviously ATACMS too, but they need way more of them. Right, Ukraine cannot match mass deployment of overwhelming numbers of troops that Russia relies on. Instead, it adopted asymmetric military doctrine that focuses on technological superiority and innovative combat, aiming to offset Russia's numerical advantage, says the ICDS. Now, this is something I've talked about recently, which is, the Ukrainians are really struggling for numbers of personnel. And I think they're really trying. And actually, Operator Starsky said this recently on our live stream together with Jonathan Fink. Go and check that out if you haven't seen it. Really good live stream with Operator Starsky. And he was saying essentially the same thing, that the Ukrainians are trying to replace troops with drones, unmanned ground drones, so that you don't need as many infantry people or people in dangerous positions. You can sit further back and operate these UGVs with mounted machine guns or drop mines instead of having sappers go out and drop these mines, and so on and so forth. It's about replacing humans with machines so that you can keep your humans safe. You can build more machines, but you can't really build trained soldiers. Not yet, at least, not until we get into the realm of, properly in the realm of Terminator, although it seems we are getting there. So you will see Ukraine continue to lean heavily on drones as a way of fighting this war, substituting humans with drones. Okay, talking about drones, this Forbes article from David Hambling talks about these big Baba Yaga drones, these hexacopters, sometimes octocopters, unseen, unsung, and underrated Ukraine's night bombers. What I like about this is it actually, David Hambling has spoken to Andrew Perpetua, of all people, to get some information here. A fleet of 2,000 bombers. So, the term Baba Yaga, it's a generic one coined by the Russians on these sort of larger drones with 4, 6, or 8 rotors, typically carrying a bomb load of 20 to 40 pounds. They can strike at ranges of up to 12 miles. So multiply that by 1.6, 1,600 kilometers to a mile, and you'll get your kilometers. Carrying fewer bombs on longer missions. I'll swap less with fewer there to edit his writing. Typical weapons include 22-pound TM62. That's about a 10 kilogram, 9 to 10 kilogram TM62 anti-tank mines, adapted for aerial bombing. Some drones carry 2 of these and drop them with high precision. They can also carry 82mm or 120mm mortar bombs. There's also one instance of a drone bomber apparently armed with a laser-guided bomb which can hit targets with high precision from considerable range. Such bombs may be used to tackle air defense systems, but they seem to be rare compared to more basic munitions. The heavy multi-copter also occasionally delivers supplies to the frontline troops. The big drones make a lot of noise and are audible from miles away. They're also easy to spot in daytime. These bombers almost invariably fly at night and keep to low altitudes to avoid air defense systems. All are equipped with thermal imagers to find targets. The Ukrainian Ministry of Defense acquired more than 2,000 heavy bomber drones through official channels last year. More were supplied by volunteers and fundraisers, but there are no totals for those. One bomber costs in the region of $20,000, so the fleet cost about half as much as one F-16. A drone team typically deploys to the front line shortly after nightfall and carries out multiple missions each night, dropping bombs or laying mines. Crewed aircraft typically fly one sortie per day. They are frequently targeted. The Russians will attempt to locate their position by their radio emissions, or will follow the drone back to them with a quadcopter. Teams are often targeted with artillery or airstrikes and need to move position regularly. Now, why bomber kills are undercounted, and this is where Andrew Perpetua comes in. So Hambling says, OSINT analyst Andrew Perpetua, who analyses, tabulates and tries to geolocate every single combat video out of Ukraine, believes that the effect of night bombers is being seriously underestimated. Any assessment of Russian losses, like the recent look at what proportion are caused by first-person view drones, relies on sources like Oryx and Warspotting, who provide accurate, deduplicated imagery confirming each loss. Writing on Twitter, Perpetua notes that because drone bomber kills are shown from above and with a thermal imager, the exact vehicle type is hard to identify, and while the bombing often produce a dramatic explosion, this is not the same as a confirmed kill where the after effects are visible in daylight. And I read out that very thread, which is that it was Jakub Janowski from Oryx saying that why are we seeing fewer vehicle losses, geo-confirmed or visually confirmed vehicle losses, and Andrew Perpetua said, actually, we're not seeing fewer losses. You're marking fewer down because you don't note down that which you cannot identify. And these aerial, these pieces of these videos showing nocturnal aerial bombardments makes it very, very difficult to identify the vehicles that are being hit, and so therefore they won't be included. And then you're hoping that some kind of satellite imagery analysis will later show a burnt out husk that you can sort of identify. But Andrew was saying that a lot of these, and they're using these bombers far more frequently, and if they are doing an awful lot of damage and doing a big job of destroying or attriting the Russian equipment, actually, this is equipment that is not being visually confirmed. So there is an undercount. So he continues, and while the bombing often produces a dramatic explosion, this is not the same as a confirmed kill where the after effects are visible in daylight. The methodology used by the loss aggregators is highly conservative and struggles to deal with the types of footage available at the moment, and as a result will lag behind reality, Perpetua writes. This loss will not appear on lists until a daytime image of the destroyed vehicle appears, which may be sometime later, and does not necessarily give any clue as to what destroyed it. Even so, they still scored more confirmed kills of Russian T-90Ms than artillery or guided missiles in the last quarter. Ukraine has pivoted to using heavy bomber drones to destroy vehicles and post tremendous numbers of losses per day using this method, writes Perpetua. He backs this up with figures, and he has compiled from attack videos shown in the graph below, indicating how the bomber kills rose rapidly from in 2024. Note that the figure in December is only for the first 18 days of the month, and that's the same graph that I showed you previously. So we've got a huge increase in these bomber kills. And there you go. So more on that, but you can go and read that article in Forbes and how the Russians are afraid of these, but trying to do things about them. Incredibly important. And now, continuing to talk about the Ukrainian military-industrial complex, or at least the electronic industrial complex, I have been waiting to see. I was wondering, I haven't talked about this, but it has been nagging me that I wonder whether Ukraine is going to start building microchips. We've seen the US trying to move away from complete reliance on places like Taiwan, considering Taiwan could be invaded. And if it is, then that might cut off microchips to the US. And so therefore, Biden, very sensibly, with the Chips and Science Act, has been, because this is where your strategic planning of your industry this is where you don't rely on a free market, that you need a government that thinks, right, we are going to, this is what's going on around the world. The free market isn't really going to be adapting to this, at least not proactively. We realize that Taiwan could get invaded. We need to apply loads of money into a microchip market, the science market. We need to develop the industry here for our own national security. And that's why strategic planning within an economy, within industry, is incredibly important for nations to do. Don't just rely on the free market. The free marketeers and libertarians will argue otherwise, but then they'll just get invaded and they wouldn't even have an army to defend because, hey, small government, they'll be phoning up, oh, can we hire an army from somewhere because I'm dead. So governments, this is the job of government, right? Now, Ukraine will start producing microchips. This will require about $1 billion, according to the Ministry of Digital Information. The plans are to produce microchips with the size of 180, 130, and 110 nanometers, very small. They can fully cover the needs of the defense, agricultural, and automotive sectors. Interesting. That doesn't surprise me. It's obviously going to take a heck of a lot of investment and logistics and effort to get those facilities built, but it makes an awful lot of sense that they would want to do that, and then they can go ahead and start thinking about making their next. When you're talking about, oh, we can't get hold of some of these parts to make these missiles, as we heard in that previous Kyiv Independent article, you can guess. I would guess that some of those components they're struggling to get hold of would be microchips. So, and then it's no surprise that Ukraine says, yeah, we're going to start building microchips. There you go. And that will stop that bottleneck from having an effect on what missiles that Ukraine can bring to bear. Anyway, that's enough from me. That's an awful lot on the UK because Keir Starmer's made that pretty, I think, important visit to Kyiv. Lots to talk about. Hopefully it was of use and interesting for you. Take care, and I'll speak to you soon.